I'll ask that you remain muted while our presenters are speaking. And then again, like I said, if we have time, I will unmute people so you can ask some questions. I'll be monitoring the chat box. If you don't want to ask questions out loud, you can ask them and I'll ask them for you. So feel free to ask any questions that way. So I'm excited to talk about ABA this morning. It's one of my favorite things to talk about. I am a big ABA cheerleader, and I am mom to Jensen, who is 9 and who's been in ABA for over 5 years now. The 3 speakers have years and years of industry knowledge. They have a lot to with us. So we'll talk to Heidi Martin, who is the outreach consultant behavior analyst for Beyond the Label. Michelle Sears, who is now the CEO of ACE Autism Center for Enrichment, and AlysiaFuhrmann from Access Lighthouse Autism Center. So I will go ahead and let you ladies talk for a second.
Okay, do you want us to introduce ourselves?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, hi, AlysiaFuhrmann. Hi, I'm with Access Behavior Analysis, and I am fortunate enough to know Jensen and Courtney quite well. So thank you for having us. And I love talking about the myths and misconceptions of behavior analysis. I think there's a lot of bad information out there, so happy to set some of those things straight.
I'm Heidi from Beyond the Label Autism Services, and I am so happy to be a part of this and have become familiar with Fuse the past few years and have just always been blown away with everything they've offered. And absolutely, I think that addressing some of the myths that have been out there about ABA are so important to kind of just clear up the water about those, because there's a lot of things you hear and you kind of take a step back to think that actually people are talking about ABA this way and believing some of those things. So super excited to clear some of those things up and talk more about it.
And I am Michelle Hennessee Sears. I am the CEO of ACE Autism Center for Enrichment. I am definitely passionate about applied behavior analysis and applications across the board with individuals with special needs, as well as just kind of more globally as a whole. And I am always happy to talk about ABA and all of the wonderful things that we can do and the changes that I think, have been made over the years with applied behavior analysis.
Okay, welcome, ladies. I'll start with the first myth. Myth 1, ABA is only effective in young children. And whoever wants to start can just jump in.
So I'll go ahead and jump in on that one, because we actually serve several individuals that are definitely in those early adolescent and teen years, as well as adults. So applied behavior analysis, you're looking at those principles of behavior. So really, what's the science behind behavior? And utilizing those and applying those to the skills that other people need outside of just young kids. So there is definitely application across the board as far as adults are concerned as well. And it is incredibly effective. And there's actually a really nice body of research to support that as well.
We currently serve up to adults as well, a lot of kind of early adolescents as well, but we have our oldest client right now is 28 and he's still making significant gains. We had an 18-year-old start with us that had no vocal communication, and he learned to use his voice to communicate, which was a huge deal. So even at 18, turning 19 and 20 in services, those are really significant gains for that individual and his family. So yeah, the science works across any age, regardless of, what they're working on. So.
Just piggybacking off of both of you guys, though, absolutely. We're serving up to age 26 currently and have had numerous adults working with us and always see progression within their programs. And we do find that, it is behavior. It's not just for a certain age group. It's for just anybody to kind of just really work well with ABA and benefit from all of the things that we have to offer. And so just personally, I got to start off just as a behavior technician working, right in with everybody. and getting to work with those adults and seeing the changes that were made. It's been kind of a soft spot for me. And one of my favorite things to do is work with the adults because it's so much of a different ABA program, but there's so many benefits that come from it.
Yeah. And I will say, kind of going back to where does that misconception kind of come from? I do think that's an important thing to consider as well. I think a lot of the misconception comes from a lot of the research is done in the younger ages, and a lot more funding is available at those younger ages. So those two components go hand in hand. Oftentimes people are doing research in areas where they can access those funds. So that's where I think a lot of that misconception comes from as well.
The second myth is something I talk about a lot, both personally and professionally for many, many years now, that all ABA is the same. So it doesn't matter which provider you choose, but really what I talk about all day long for, I don't know, 6 years now is different providers and how different it is just within one area from provider to provider, all the different ways you provide the therapy you provide, and all the different flavors and settings of ABA there are, which is really interesting if you've only ever been at one provider, or if you don't know much about ABA, you don't know how many choices are out there. So go ahead.
All right, I'll start with this one. So the science is the same no matter what. Behavior analysis is behavior analysis. However, that is a tool that can be wielded in a variety of different ways. So different providers have different approaches to using that tool. So some providers take a very traditional kind of approach where they will do a lot of discrete trial training with flashcards at a table. Other providers will take a very natural approach. They'll do all home-based and community-based therapy. And some providers will do a combination of both. So that's one consideration, is just where they're doing, the treatment and how they're using the environment itself. Are they going into the home and just essentially kind of running flashcards in the home as well? Or are they actually using the home environment as their, cues to respond to certain behaviors and setting up the environment so that those become what kind of control those behaviors going forward? Additionally, a lot of people think of our science as black and white. And, there's the concept like reinforcement says, if you want a behavior to increase, reinforce it. Therefore, if you don't want a behavior to increase, you don't want to see it continue, such as a tantrum, don't reinforce it. And so a lot of people take that to be very black, like if they're engaging in an undesired behavior, I really have to make sure I don't give them any access to reinforcement, no attention, no attending to it, no redirecting, anything. I kind of have to wait it out. So some providers take that very black and white approach. And then there are other providers that take a kind of a more kind of gray area approach to it. My staff hear me constantly saying, there cannot be time out if there's not time in. So even just the idea that give them a little bit of reinforcement in the moment, get them out of this behavior. If it's a toddler being dropped off for the first time, comfort them, they're a child. The idea is treat them as a child first, get them engaged in something else. And then the onus is on you as the caregiver to make sure that the reinforcement level is so much more significant when they're being appropriate, that little reinforcement they got for that tantrum, that's not going to be something that keeps that behavior going. And that's something, when families are doing tours and we're talking through different things and concerns that come up, such as this, I do tell them, ask questions, because you're not going to really know until you're in there seeing it, how they're going to approach those things. And some families really like that very black and white approach. In fact, I had a mom call the other day and she asked me this kind of exact question, like why, this behavior is happening, but they're not really taking data and they don't have a behavior intervention plan for it. And I was like, well, he's 2, so let's talk through that. But she wants the opposite approach. She wants us to take a much more rigid approach with her son. And I was like, we can accommodate that. Absolutely. She's a behavior analyst and a mom, so it's a little bit different situation there. But I was like, we can absolutely accommodate that. But we kind of talk through kind of that reasoning and such. So again, every provider is going to have a different approach. And so you really just have to ask those questions, ask how you're going to be informed of changes, how you're going to be engaged, what part you as the parent play, to get a feel for if that provider is a good fit for what you're looking for. Some families want to be extremely involved, and other families really want to be more hands off, and everybody's different and has different things going on. So.
And I always tell families, the number one thing I would suggest is just going and touring centers. I've toured a lot of centers, both personally and professionally. And the first center my child was at was a good fit on paper, but was not a good fit in reality. And my child's second center was newer and very different than the first center that was very established. But when I went there and I saw how the children and the therapist interacted, it just seemed like somewhere I could see my child being.
I think that's super, super important, especially when you come to picking a provider. It's not just, if you've heard the name or if you know everybody there, it's also how much is this going to benefit my child, and looking at whether it's centers, whether it's home-based, community-based, whatever that may be. Every single one of these centers or companies have a different background. So looking into, there's going to be multiple different people working with your child, whether that's the BCBA, BCABA, RBT, things like that, knowing that there's experience coming from so many different places. So asking those questions, seeing what your provider can benefit you with, that's going to be something you want to go in with. We get to the kind of end of our intake meetings, when we're looking at a child beginning services and we're saying, hey, do you have any questions? And a lot of these parents are coming in and they don't have any questions, which is great. But I encourage parents to come up with something to ask. What is going to be important for you, especially once you get services started? Because sometimes you get into the middle of services and you're like, ooh, I don't like the way this is going. Or just kind of like you had mentioned, the black and white. I want it more black and white. I want it more, the scientific approach, or I like the naturalistic approach. I like the naturalistic teaching. So make sure to maybe incorporate some of those things in your initial kind of assessments. And whenever you're going through those first discussions with your ABA provider, always bringing up any questions that you may have. And also just looking at, what are you more comfortable with? What works with your schedule? I know from just working with the home base, I've worked both clinic and home base since we're allowed to offer those two options now. However, sometimes home base works really well for parents that may have a tricky schedule, but then also parents have scheduling needs that clinic is the way to go, that works for them, that's what they're comfortable with. So just exploring all of your different options and asking those questions is going to be crucial whenever deciding who your provider needs to be.
Just to kind of follow up with all of that. I mean, not only are we looking at a provider as like a whole company, but also the individual rendering provider as the BCBA. We all come to behavior analysis with a different background, a different experience, a different education. And while, we do still have, those very core beliefs about behavior analysis and behavior itself, us as individuals, we're not always going to mesh with every single family. We're not going to mesh with every single patient. So when you're looking for a clinic or a practitioner or a home-based provider, it's always going to be really important that you as the family can also develop that therapeutic relationship with your BCBA or your BCABA, because that's going to be important in having that communication piece, so that you as the parent are also getting your needs met, because you know your child best. You know what your child truly needs. And we're coming at it from a much different standpoint to say, okay, we understand that, yes, like, you feel like you know that your child has these needs, but here are all of the little steps that we have to take to get there. So being able to have that relationship and have that rapport with your individual clinician is really, really important, because we're not all created equal.
Okay, moving on to our next myth. Myth 3, a child in ABA spends his or her entire day doing table work.
I think this is a super important myth to kind of get out there and get it resolved and get it kind of busted up and showing that, nope, this is not the case. Of course, there are the benefits of table work. And especially when we're looking at like transition readiness skills into the school and things like that, there are those instances where we need to incorporate table work. However, ABA was never made into this occurs at the table. It can be implemented wherever it needs to be implemented. So whenever we're looking at the home, if you're doing an in-home practice, then you've got all of these environments to work in, and utilizing those as your workspace is going to be part of the therapy you're given. So, maybe we're doing something in the kitchen, maybe we're doing something in the bathroom, bedroom, playroom, wherever that may be, we can continuously run those practices. And what's important also to understand is that all of these practices are incorporated. The more they're incorporated into these different places, the better generalization we're going to have and be able to transfer those skills not only from the home, but to the community, to school, to the center, wherever that child may be. We want those skills to be used more than just at a table. We want them to be involved with their daily lives. So keeping ABA fluent and working in the natural environment while also working at the table is, I think, one of the most important things for us to do on a daily basis.
I think this goes back to just the previous question. Not every provider is the same. So it's really interesting that we started as a home-based therapy provider, and then we've always continued to provide home-based as well as clinic-based once we had our clinics running. But we work with another organization, and when COVID hit, we pivoted. We're like, everybody out of the clinic, social distance, we're doing home. And this other organization that we help support, it was really interesting because they did not know that they could go into the home and just use the homes and, materials. And so they had a really hard time kind of conceptualizing, well, what is home therapy going to look like? How are we going to do it? How are we going to have all the materials there for the therapy program? So it comes back to that kind of like, evaluate your providers, evaluate their background, and they were able to pivot and they were able to do successful home therapy. They just needed coaching. And so, it's one of those things. Your individual provider may not necessarily need to have every answer, but if they can go to someone to help support them to get that knowledge, that's also really, really helpful as well. So, but again, there's nothing inherently wrong with table work. There's nothing inherently wrong with what we call discrete trial training. If I say, what's your name? And you say, Courtney, and I say, oh, good job, Courtney. That's a discrete trial. But I think the idea is like, look at what kids do and how they learn. It's never sitting at a table. It's through multi-sensory input and play and fun and engagement. And we all know that, so it really, there's nothing wrong, but with doing work at a table when it's needed, it's appropriate, but that's not where the most effective learning is going to take place. So you want to see quite a bit of engagement in other ways, because otherwise they're going to plateau, they're going to be bored, and you're going to start to see escape motivated behaviors. Our kids don't want to be in therapy, and that's the last thing we want.
Yeah, and one of, with applied behavior analysis, it can occur anywhere and everywhere. There was some good research through the pandemic that was coming out about behavior analysis via Zoom. And kind of what that looks like. There is a ton of research out there that demonstrates that in order to facilitate learning and less trials for acquisition, play. I mean, that's such a big part of our development is play and that ability to play. So I know that at least for us, that's always something that I'm really trying to hit home with my staff, is that you're going to get a much faster rate of acquisition. You're going to develop those skills a lot faster when it's fun and when it's play-based. So we really try to, incorporate a lot of that. And, for, again, like, not everybody is going to have the same needs with ABA. And that's why, making sure that your needs are being met as a parent, as a family, is really important. And it's going to continue to be important across the lifespan.
We did ABA at Disneyland.
See?
So when I
You did
hear
anyway.
this, like that kids sit at a table for 7 hours a day, and like, just meet my kid. There's no way he is sitting at a table for 7 hours a day. That's not possible. I know tons of ABA kiddos, they are not sitting at a table for 7 hours a day. That's not like something that's possible for them.
I think that's too an
Something
important concept to
we
hit
want to do for them is not something, yeah.
When you are looking back at who you're going to choose as a provider, and knowing that, if you are looking at the clinic, how are they incorporating different things rather than just table work? And I know there's some great clinics out there that have super fun playrooms and sensory rooms, and whether that be, meeting for a morning group. Of course, COVID kind of pushed us back a little bit, and we did get super creative with how we could implement ABA, not just at the table, but looking at, is your ABA provider, taking breaks to go to the playground, throughout the day and incorporating some fun playtime? Or are there times that, they're working on the rug, on the floor, even, having different stations around the clinic that they can move here and there to go do that ABA therapy and not just sit at the table? Be sure to ask those questions and take those tours and look at your different providers and see, what can we do to make this as fun and enriching as possible.
Our next myth 4, we don't know if ABA is effective because it's a new treatment.
I think that's definitely one to hit on as well, because everyone can agree ABA has been around for so long. It's just that, finally someone put a name to it, kind of thing. Of course, going back all the way into the 1920s, we saw behaviorism coming about, and we saw, all of these different scientists coming up with these programs, and then into the 60s working through and really getting a start at ABA. But the best thing about ABA is that it's constantly evolving. It's not ever just black and white and the same. And I think now, today, we're in a completely different place than we were way back when ABA started. So it's not new. It's just that it continuously changes, and we get new practices, we try new things, and we're always pushing ourselves to incorporate the better, and to really make ABA more than just what it was when it started.
Michelle, were you going to go? I saw you unmuted yourself. So
No, I just kind of
Okay.
unmuted myself to
no.
maybe be
Okay,
ready,
no worries. I just
but-
didn't want to step on toes, and I'm like, I'll answer
No.
all of these. Like, I don't want to just like take over. Another thing, because we hear, like, how do you know if it's effective or not? Obviously, we base our interventions on research. Research supports how effective it is. And one of the things that I tell families when they're coming in for a tour is like, I understand, I'm a provider, I'm biased. Of course, I'm going to tell you behavior analysis works. Look at the motivations of people though. Does insurance want to cover up to 40 hours a week of behavior analysis treatment for children? No, they don't. They would love to not cover that expense. However, there's so much to support how effective it is and they are trying, no matter how hard they try, insurance can't cut it out. So there's one a little bit just like, oh yeah, like that. I see what you're saying. There's gotta be enough to show how incredibly effective it is. And then something else that, we talk about a lot at our clinic is like, don't let me tell you, let me show you. I can get in and I can start showing you changes in the moment. I may not be able to make every child do everything I need them to do in that moment. Of course, I need to go in and figure things out. But, within a 5-minute session, I should be able to demonstrate my science and the changes you can see. And with continued reinforcement and teaching of those behaviors, you'll see those progress. So I kind of always tell people, nothing's ever set in stone. Try it, give it a good faith effort. And if it isn't working for your child, you can always find another provider. Don't throw the whole science out just because maybe that provider wasn't effective. You can always change. But I've never had a situation where a family is like, oh, I'm not sure. Maybe I want to just start for the summer, or maybe just part-time, or even just like 2 hours or something, where then later they were not lamenting over the fact, like, why didn't we do this sooner? Why didn't we start this at an earlier age? I work very heavily in other disabilities. So really engaged in the Down syndrome community and with other primary genetic disorders that, behavior analysis isn't as well known, and to convince them to seek the services and the loopholes and the kind of things they have to go through to be able to get the services, because it requires that autism diagnosis still. That's a heavy lift for a lot of families, especially in such a community that values inclusion and stuff to the level they do. So, seeds that I planted 7-8 years ago within that community we're just seeing some of those blossom now. And those families are the ones telling others, don't walk, run to get what you need to get in services. Because if I had done this when they had told me about it, like, oh my gosh. And I always tell them, don't play with regrets. You never can do that, but they're here now. And the beautiful thing is, going back to that first myth, age is not the factor here, right? The fact is you are now in treatment and you're going to see these gains, and they're going to be so much more meaningful to you now because you understand what it would mean if they didn't have it. So
We also started part-time.
and then you were won over to a full-time program.
Yes, not with you. We started part-time. We were 2 or 3 days a week for like 9 months. And then we just tried full-time 5 years ago. just tried full-time
dip
5
the
years
toe
ago.
in.
And that's what we're doing now. Yeah.
I think that this kind of goes back to, it is effective. I mean, there's 50 plus years worth of research to back that up. But the way that I always kind of explain it to parents is that, would you go to work if your employer wasn't paying you? And a majority of people say, absolutely not. I'm not going to work unless I'm getting paid. Guess what? That paycheck is a schedule of reinforcement. Would you go to work if your boss told you every single day what a terrible job you're doing? No, you're going to leave that job eventually because you're going to be miserable. Again, those schedules of reinforcement. And that is, one of the foundations of behavior analysis is we're looking at those schedules of reinforcement and how do we increase specific behaviors? How do we then shape those behaviors? And I always tell parents, it's a way of learning. So it's not necessarily that we're going to, only work on this one skill. It's about learning how to learn, and utilizing our science to do that. So, it's incredibly effective because, again, like pretty much if you look at any, major system, it's typically rooted in those principles of behavior. Again, you wouldn't go to work if you weren't getting a paycheck. So, that's kind of that light bulb moment for most people, is that they don't realize that behavior analysis really is pervasive in our lives, and that it's more than just, working with children or working with disabilities. It truly is, something that covers every ounce of our lives in some way, shape, or form.
So myth 5, the goal of ABA is to cure autistics. This one hurts my mama heart a little bit. My son has been in ABA for over 5 years. Like I've said, he is no less autistic than he was when he entered ABA. But especially in March around Autism Awareness or Acceptance Month, that comes up a lot. So what do you guys have to say about that?
I'm happy to jump in again. So we're not out to cure anybody of anything. We are out to teach individuals skills that are going to improve their quality of life, as well as the quality of life of their family unit. And for each individual, that is different. So, we work with people from all different backgrounds and environments and such. And, one family might care deeply about something that another family does not mind at all. And so we really have to individualize what we're working on and how we're working on it to cater to those children. But it isn't about curing their autism. I am surrounded by individuals with autism all day, majority of the time, more than my own family. And they're amazing individuals who are fun and caring and sweet and creative. And I don't want to change them as people. I want to give them the skills to be more successful. That's really all it is. In the absence of skills, children will learn things to get their wants and needs met. So oftentimes our kids learn, if I do this ritual or I engage in this behavior, that's going to get my wants and needs met. And that may work for them, in that time and that moment, but it may not be as universally accepted. So we're trying to give them skills that if they go into schools or if they're in a daycare setting or when they're out in the community, they have a toolbox of tools that are going to work so much more effectively for them. That's really all we're working on.
I think, yeah, hitting the nail on the head right there. Exactly. This isn't just a practice for one person or one certain type of person. ABA really hits so much more, and it's completely geared towards individuals on their own, personalities, what their skills are, what their deficits are. Working and individualizing each program is what we are always working towards. And every program is going to look different. Every program is going to work on different skills. And nothing, I feel like, is ever the same in ABA. And whenever we talk, between consultants and we're like, are you working on this? Yes or no? And then we notice that there's kind of a same thing. Everybody's working on the same skill. Then we're like, okay, take a step back. Is this coming from directly an assessment, or is this really individualized to the people we're working for? And creating that and making it individualized means that we're not just looking at a certain set of skills that need to be worked on and increased or that they have to do. We want it to be individualized and want it to be just making their lives better. And whether that be teaching them how to work around the house or teaching them, their basic skills of speaking and performing daily tasks and functional living behaviors. So no, it's definitely not geared towards a cure by any means, but definitely just increasing those behaviors or decreasing behaviors in order to enrich those individuals' lives.
So this is kind of one of those pieces for me that, Courtney, you had said that, it's very important to you as a mom. And, my son has attention deficit disorder. And, in order for him to be successful, he has to take medication. Does that medication cure his ADHD? Absolutely not. Not by any stretch of the imagination. Does it make it more possible for him to have relationships and to better function in his daily life? Absolutely. And I think that, we we have, ABA it's a treatment. It's a type of treatment. So similar to other types of treatment, does insulin cure your diabetes? No, it doesn't. It doesn't cure it. There is no cure for autism. However, applied behavior analysis and those principles of behavior can help alleviate those symptoms. So, for my son, his medication for ADHD helps alleviate his symptoms of ADHD so that he can better function in his life. For people that are diabetic, insulin is one of the things that they need to help alleviate those symptoms of their diabetes. It doesn't cure it, but it makes it possible for them to lead a more fulfilling life. So, looking at, how we practice ABA, and I know that there was a question kind of posed in, I think the chat maybe, that was, autistic individuals are completely against ABA. And I think that that's kind of a gross overgeneralization, because I actually do know several BCBAs who are autistic. We employ individuals with autism. I think that, the argument is, well, socially significant according to whom? Well, it's socially significant according to our values as a society. While, we definitely all go against the grain of society in some way, shape, or form, overall, we do still try to do our best to fit in and form relationships and have successful, productive, fulfilling lives for our individuals on the spectrum, because they learn differently than somebody who is neurotypical. We have to teach them how to learn so that as they grow and age and mature, that they can make those decisions for themselves as far as when they are going to want to go against the grain as far as those societal values are concerned, and when they do want to try to fit in, but they have to be able to have that ability to learn those skills that they need to do either one of those things. And I think that that's one of the things that a lot of people miss with applied behavior analysis, is that that's something that we can develop and we try to develop. Alicia and Heidi have both talked about, the very historical black and white ABA. And I think that if you truly looked at the practice of applied behavior analysis today compared with the practice of behavior analysis 10, 20, 30 years ago, it's vastly different. And a lot of that is because of continued research and, continuing to evolve in our theory and our practice. And that's really what's important, as far as continuing to produce good outcomes and continuing to truly be a support for individuals and families, and to truly teach these necessary skills that, are important.
I see some of the arguments like ABA is trying to extinguish these harmless stems, but out of the, I don't know, couple of hundred of ABA families I don't know anybody that doesn't have bigger fish to fry. We don't care about those small harmless things that make our kids look different, because we usually have big life-changing things to work on, like basic communication and not hurting yourself and not hurting others, being able to be safe when you're in public. We're not even Like on Jensen's program, we would have to go through like 400 things before we could get to that point. So it's always like, it's a little frustrating. It's a little amusing. Yeah. But well, yeah, I'm glad we addressed that one, but I'm happy to move on. Myth 6, ABA trains children to respond or sound like robots. And again, I think some of these things give you guys power that you just don't have. Your critics give you a lot of power that you just don't have.
Here's the thing. Rigidity is part of the diagnosis of autism. So a lot of the children on the spectrum do have rigidity. But also what is kind of a cornerstone of the diagnosis is a deficit in language development, right? And so people who say that often don't necessarily recognize, they think that if this child just went to speech therapy, they would learn these skills and they would have natural sounding language. When in reality, most of the time what we see is they don't develop the skill at all. So without the behavior analysis, they don't have the communication. So I would rather teach a child to communicate to the best of their ability, even if it is rote sounding, if it improves their quality of life. Now, as behavior analysts, we also know there are different things that we can do to make sure that we are generalizing those skills so they respond to different cues and they give a very response at different times and things like that. So of course we don't want to train them up. And there are times you can inadvertently teach a child to engage in certain skills that become rigid in a way that you didn't anticipate. But the beautiful thing is then our science also gives us the skill to change that and teach it in a different way. But again, so that's not our goal. We don't want them to just learn rote language. We want them to learn language that's going to really benefit them in their quality of life. So in the absence of being able to communicate, if I teach a child to ask for water and the only way they will ever ask for it is by saying, I want water, over and over again for the rest of their life, and I can't teach them a more flexible way to say, can I have water? Will you get me water? All of those things. Then at the end of the day, I still feel really good about what I did, because that kid, when he's thirsty, he can ask for water and he could not before. And I mean, again, we get kids that are much older who don't have those skills. And the ability to ask for something so simple as water or a hug from their mom or their favorite juice, those things add so much value that I think, that one, it just drives me nuts because I'm like, they have language. They have language. This is incredible. So that's my opinion on it though.
That's definitely one I think we hear way too often, is that it's just a rote response. Whereas, yes, we're just starting to get a communication out there. And if we can get communication built up, then we have done something. But also knowing that some practices of lives are just rote. And the way to teach them and the way to learn them is to first go through that rote response. So if you're thinking about just your daily task of brushing teeth, whenever you're first learning that, you're following all of those steps. And, your mom might have hand over hand prompted you to follow those steps or provided a visual to follow those exact steps. However, once we get those steps in our repertoire and we learn those things as individuals, we're going through and making that just into what we need it be. So maybe, Courtney, you might put more toothpaste on your toothbrush than I do, or I might use more water or something. But to start out learning those things, we went through the rote response of, get your toothbrush, put toothpaste on it, get water. And then once we completely learn that skill, then we start to generalize it and shape it into what we want to see it as. And I think also those different responses that we're teaching, we do shape them into different things. And that is a big part of ABA, is to shape and generalize and change it to where we can use it in multiple settings. So think of, if we're teaching a kiddo to respond to, hi, how are you today? If they can say, I'm good, they're engaging in communication with a peer, with an adult, whoever that may be, they're able to say that. And then we can go one step farther and start teaching, I am sad, I am happy, how are you today? And eventually lead onto that. But we do have that original, just, I am good. And they can always lean back onto that if they need it, or we can provide them with the extra skills that they may need. But shaping words and generalizing those things are always a goal of ABA, but every learner is going to learn differently. So we always have to just individualize that as much as possible and give our kiddos the skills they need just to be social and interact with the environments around them.
Okay, we'll move on to mid-7. The only diagnosis, the only people that can benefit from ABA are autism.
Well, again, kind of already touched on that. So that's not true. Obviously any individual that needs any sort of behavior change, when you boil it down, all behavior analysis is just really effective teaching strategies. I go into schools all the time and observe classrooms as maybe they have a child who's not being as successful in that environment. So I'm asked to come in and do kind of an independent evaluation. And I get to see, tons of kids across a ton of different environments with different instructors. And every time there's a classroom that I'm blown away by, I can point to the principles of behavior that individual does really well. And so they have really great classroom management because they're relying on these core principles of behavior of reinforcing desired behaviors, and those sort of things. And so again, that works for just children in classroom setting. It works for adults. It works with our spouses, and can shape your husband to load the dishwasher. But then also, any individual who needs, a higher level of support. We work with individuals with Down syndrome, Prader-Willi, CP, a variety of kind of rare, newly discovered genetic disorders. Really any individual who needs to learn any skill. Behavior analysis is just a really great, effective way to teach it. And I am a behavior analyst, and it's always a joke kind of in our field, like behavior analysts have the worst behaved kids because we're like, I'm too tired when I get home. Like I can't, just take the iPad and go. But something with the, my kids, yes, I don't come home and I don't use the principles of behavior analysis constantly on them. I'm not like driving to teach them all these things through the science, but I do, when they are engaging in certain behaviors that all kids engage in, I respond one way and I focus on teaching them other skills to replace it. So there are certain things that, my own children, they learn through the same principles. And when I need them to learn things that I cannot tolerate in my home, it's fine if they don't brush their hair, granola bar smeared all over my walls, fine. But they are not allowed to argue with each other because like, I can't handle it. Like, I just can't. And safety commands, they have got to respond to safety commands and accepting no. And those are the things I focus on teaching through behavior, because those were important to me to teach. And behavior analysis was a really effective tool for me to teach my own children those things. So it isn't specific to autism. That misconception really just comes because the funding is there. So, and again, as we talked before, research often happens in areas where people can access the funding. So it's kind of that, chicken or egg situation, but they have the funding there, and that's why.
Something we do a lot too is incorporate ABA and just to our practice with our staffing and those that work with us. So think about, going back to a job, if you are not provided with a paycheck, you're not going to want to do it. Well, also we want to increase positive behaviors through our RBTs, our other BCBAs, our BCABAs, whoever is working with us. We'll provide them with positive reinforcement here and there to increase those skills that we want to see. So we're not only applying it to the kiddos we're working with, we're applying it to everyone around us. And yes, 100% agree. Husbands, you can absolutely do this on, and is wonderful. And they don't even realize what's happening. And so it's always fun, just to kind of sneak those things in there, but you see the progress of it and it's working. I've even used it on my dogs whenever I need them to follow command, positive reinforcement, give them a treat, things like that. it's so many places we can incorporate ABA, and I don't think people understand that they're doing it. It's just that they may not realize it. And so, no, it's not just beneficial for one certain type of person. It is beneficial across everyone. And take that as you will, learn as you want, learn as much as you want, because you can incorporate this into your daily lives and make some things way easier to get accomplished than maybe you thought.
And Heidi, one of your favorite little boys has a genetic condition and technically qualifies for autism.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And so there are those different diagnoses that we always push. If someone's like coming to us and say, we want ABA, you know, hey, see if you can go get a second opinion, or see if you can somehow obtain that diagnosis so that you can get autism diagnosis, and we can serve you and provide those services, because it's so beneficial to everyone and not just individuals with autism.
I think that Heidi and Alicia, you guys put it beautifully. You know, there are so many more applications of applied behavior analysis than just one specific diagnosis. There is a really great body of research as far as behavior analysis is concerned, with a myriad of developmental disabilities, as well as business management. So, you know, when we talk about operational business management, there's a lot of applications there as far as increasing productivity of your staff, developing those desired work behaviors and skills that people need to be successful. There are a lot of applications of applied behavior analysis in a lot of different fields.
We have just a few minutes left, so I'm going to ask a bonus question.
Okay.
The misconception that it's all like punishing bad behaviors. That's what you do all day long, is punish these bad behaviors.
Yeah. So no, actually, a lot of people have that misconception, because when people reach a certain point of recognizing, oh, we need something different, oftentimes children have, again, developed their own skills kind of to get their wants and needs met. So people will see that a kid who's maybe having big tantrums or big problem behaviors will come in, and then soon after, those behaviors are gone. And they're like, oh, they got rid of those behaviors. And people think that we use punishment to do that. Really, actually, what we do is we determine, why are you doing what you're doing? There's got to be a reason, right? Because we're lazy as humans. We're not going to do things that don't work for us, right? We're going to do something only if it serves a function. And so what we want to do is identify why they're doing what they're doing and teach an appropriate replacement behavior to that. So for example, if a child is flipping tables because they don't want to do their math homework, I can get that flipping table behavior under control pretty well by simply teaching the kid a replacement to asking for a break, help, to be all done. And so people, you know, assume that what we've done is we've focused on that, punished it, gotten rid of it. But really what I've done is I've identified an appropriate behavior that works better and reinforce that. So I don't have to use punishment. And actually behavior analysis is very in line with trauma-informed care, because it's very consistent. You know exactly what to expect. It's very, very reinforcement based. Punishment really, by definition, punishment decreases a behavior. What it doesn't do, it doesn't teach anything, right? It can get rid of something, but it doesn't teach something. So our kiddos' punishment may be necessary in some cases, but typically we only use those sort of kind of aversives, like a timeout, say, you know, like you would do with other children, when it's a dangerous behavior for themselves or others, or it is really interfering with their ability to learn or create meaningful relationships. In all situations, even if we do have to introduce a little bit of punishment, and the parents know it's agreed upon in a plan, other strategies have been tried, all of those things. But if we do need to do that, we still focus very, very heavily on the replacement behaviors and reinforcing those. So punishment is a tool we have, and we can use it, but it's really not our most effective tool by any stretch.
Absolutely. And two, just looking at, and I'm sure you guys can completely agree, from an ethical standpoint and from when we're looking at a behavior intervention plan, we have a whole ladder of things that we go through and see, why is this behavior occurring? What's going to work? Can we teach a replacement behavior? Can we provide some sort of reinforcement to increase positive behaviors while at the same time decreasing any negative behaviors that we may be seeing? But when it comes to punishment, that may be a last resort kind of thing we're looking at, or something that we may not want to incorporate. But after speaking with the parents, speaking with our whole behavioral team, we understand this may be our only option. However, it's never our go-to option. Looking at, really utilizing reinforcement and really praising those appropriate behaviors is our number one goal to go towards, and to increase as well as we can with reinforcement and replacement behaviors and such.
I think the only thing that I'll, chime in on this is that, it's, as society, when we hear the word punishment, we think of a lot of really terrible things. However, in behavior analysis, that's not our definition of punishment. And, ultimately, for behaviors that we're wanting to reduce because they're interfering or they are dangerous, we always go the route of just withholding reinforcement from those particular behaviors. So we're just not going to reinforce those any longer. A punisher, like you're either going to add something or you're removing something that is going to decrease a specific behavior. And what is added or removed can be something as simple as us, a touch on the hand to say, hey, let's put your hand down, or whatever the case may be. It's anything that is going to reduce that behavior effectively. We kind of all go to that mindset of when we hear punishment that it's, spanking or timeouts or, any other number of things that as parents we've probably done. But for us as behavior analysts, those things are not necessarily the case. And, so I just kind of wanted to maybe follow up and shed a little bit more light, because I think, as behavior analysts, when we talk about punishment and people hear that word, there's always that connotation that comes along with it. And I think that, because we do have a different language in behavior analysis. So, some of those misconceptions that, we've been talking about have definitely come out of the fact that we do have this different language and we do have this different understanding of some of these concepts from what is generally viewed in society. So, I'm sure, I can't speak for Heidi or Alicia, but I'm sure that, any provider that is truly worth their weight is always going to be more than happy to answer questions. They're always going to be more than happy to help people develop that common language and to understand, where we're coming from. That's part of working with people. And at the end of the day, we're working with people, and you have to be able to develop those relationships and to really be effective in your job.
It is a little after 11, so I will go ahead and end the session. I know these three women, they are very busy and very in demand, so we'll let them get on with their day. We will start, we have meetups starting now, but we have sessions starting at 1 o'clock. We have Centers for Independent Living 101. Inexpensive and easy sensory inputs for powerful results, and a recreation panel. So I hope you enjoy the next 2 days of the conference. Thank you all so much for coming. Bye.
Yeah.